would win in a fight battle? Zoro or Katakuri? Commander versus Commander? Future Sight versus Advanced Conqueror's Haki? And Sharp Metal versus delicious malleable mochi? This is a fairly tough matchup for anyone to call, but I can tell you that the general public opinion tends to lean in the direction of one of two buckets. You've got either Katakuri because I like him more, or Zoro low diffs dat ass. Actually, there's also a third confusing yet noteworthy bucket. Bro, currently even ulti is stronger than Katakuri. So with that in mind, we're going to change this video to Zoro versus ulti, Commander versus 1/6 of the Flying Six, Advanced Conqueror's Haki versus not that, and Sharp Metal versus Blunt Heavy Dinosaur Head. Alright, let's do a deep dive into this matchup. And as it turns out, Zoro already won off screen while I was announcing it. Great! So what do we do now? Back to Katakuri, I suppose. So if you look up Zoro versus Katakuri on Google, the always correct source of information, the first result I get is from a One Piece card game tournament. It's a Katakuri deck versus a Zoro deck, and according to this scientific investigation, Katakuri won. This is quite literally the closest thing we have to a canon answer regarding this fight. But I was wondering if we could come up with a more substantial resolution. To put my own personal bias out there, I am such a big fan of Zoro that I do literally own a life-size statue of him who lives in my office, adorned by a variety of other primarily Zoro-based merchandise. But I'm also such a big fan of Katakuri that I once bought a can of coffee that I have no intention of drinking just because it has his face on it. So I'm gonna go ahead and call myself fairly unbiased here. Now, to be clear, what we are using is post-Wano Zoro and Whole Cake Island Katakuri, primarily because we don't know anything about post-Wano Katakuri. He might be stronger, he might be not. Quite frankly, I don't care. Both are first commanders of an Emperor of the Sea. However, if we examine the bounty county, Zoro is worth more, a whopping 1.111 billion berries, with Katakuri ending his day of trading at 1,057 million berries. So as far as the world government is concerned, Zoro stocks are a more solid addition to the investment portfolio, and in fictional pirate terms, that means that they think Zoro is a bigger threat. However, this gap is small enough that it's a meaningless difference. And to be honest, the entire number is kind of meaningless because King's bounty was higher. That was like 1.390 billion money units. And as a result, there's a common train of logic here, which results in the following mathematical equation. King is greater than Katakuri, Zoro is greater than King, therefore Zoro is greater than Katakuri. Now, from what we saw, to be honest, I think that both Zoro and Katakuri are greater than King. That's why this video is about them and not him. But going into this matchup, Zoro does step into combat with the greatest of win-loss records. He's actually officially one of the biggest losers in all of One Piece, with 2,001 losses to Kuina alone. It should be said that Zoro did the majority of his losing during his early years, whereas in the modern day, it's arguable that Zoro has only lost once, and that would be to one Drakeul Mihawk, after which point Zoro declared that he would never lose again, and if we don't count racist fishmen, lightning gods, and this chimney he got stuck in that one time on Water 7, then Zoro has kept his word. This is where it gets exciting though, because Katakuri is the exact opposite. Katakuri has done 100% of his losing in the modern day, with an allegedly flawless record prior to Luffy, and Katakuri has a very similar I will never lose again philosophy to Zoro. The only difference being one word, because Katakuri simplified this idea to I will never lose, which is unfortunate because one of them has to lose, with the first and biggest factor of this fight being Haki. This is the primary difference between Zoro and Katakuri. Both are users of all three brands of Haki, however both have pursued their own advancement. Katakuri took the path of observation to the conclusion of Future Sight, so Katakuri can see a handful of seconds into the future, which is stupidly powerful. Meanwhile, Zoro got lost, fell down a hill, and landed into a steaming pile of Advanced Conqueror's Haki, which means that he can cut things that are like really hard. We're talking leaving a permanent scar on Kaido levels of hard, although sadly he's not able to show it off due to the whole Kaido lava bath thing. So here's what it comes down to. If Zoro can land a hit on Katakuri, then we're probably done here. His attack power is so far beyond what Katakuri can produce, and Katakuri may not immediately go down, but if the Moss Head can wound Kaido, then Katakuri is being chopped up and served as Unagi even with the Mochi regeneration, remembering that it's a Paramecia, not a Logia, so it does have limits. But all of this is assuming that Zoro is either fast enough or smart enough to actually hit Katakuri. Is Zoro fast enough to pull off a Snake Man? I'd say that's very unlikely. Even if he was, the key thing about Snake Man is that it confused poor little Katakuri. All of a sudden, punches were coming out of directions that even Future Sight wasn't able to fully predict. And also, even if he does dodge, the Python attack literally just continued getting faster and faster until it eventually hit something, usually Katakuri. So it was a perfect counter to Katakuri, one which I don't think Zoro has an equivalent of. If Future Sight continuously stops Zoro's hits, then Katakuri should eventually get the better of him, but that could take a long time. Which brings up a thing. The longer the fight goes on for Katakuri, the higher the risk that at some moment he's going to lose concentration and give Zoro an opening, which may very well happen because he will get particularly annoyed if and when he misses his merienda. This is the only form of stress relief that Katakuri has in life, so without it, he's going to become a very upset boy. So if Katakuri wins, it needs to be quickly. The issue being that, look, I don't think that Katakuri has an attack strong enough to quickly bring down Zoro, which isn't so much due to Katakuri's lack of power, but more Zoro's out of this world durability. What we're looking at here could be a Luffy-esque 12-hour fight because both Zoro and Katakuri have never give up attitudes and the willpower to match that. Katakuri will never give up because he needs to retain his perfection, and Zoro will never give up until the last drop of blood has left his body. In terms of actual physical durability, I'd probably lean in favor of Zoro, but that's only because he's very experienced when it comes to being beaten up, whereas Katakuri isn't actually used to getting hit. He uses Future Sight to dodge most things, and Armament Haki to block anything he can't dodge. But when he does get hit, he takes that damage so much harder than a punching bag like Zoro, which isn't to undersell the stamina of Katakuri, not at all. Even when his fight against Luffy ended, Katakuri still wasn't out of stamina. He was ready to keep going. The fight ended because he conceded. But this match has a pretty crazy X factor going for it that the Luffy versus Katakuri fight did not, which is the question of Haki level ups. Would Zoro pull a Luffy? Would he see that Katakuri has Future Sight and just decide to learn it for himself? It's not out of character at all. In fact, it's exactly what he did against Star's Bones. Keep on struggling till the brink of death and then learn to cut steel / use Haki, just like old mate Rayleigh said. The real advancement in Haki happens during extreme use in battle. This experience could result in Zoro learning Future Sight, but also the opposite could happen as well, because they both have something that the other one lacks. Zoro could develop Future Sight, but Katakuri could unlock advanced Conqueror's Haki. Against Luffy, Katakuri had no chance for this advancement because he never faced a power greater than his own. But if Zoro were to whip out a shiny new Haki, then Katakuri, in his quest to be the perfect being, would also strive for it. It's a really great fight because both combatants are driven enough to make one another stronger, but also very bad for this video because that results in them being deemed roughly equal. A question we should ask is, how overpowered is Future Sight? Well, according to Emperor of the Sea Red Hair Shanks, the answer is very, but according to Emperor of the Sea Kaido, the answer is not very, because as far as we know, Kaido does not have Future Sight, and that wasn't a huge benefit for Luffy at any stage of their fight. So if this is even possible, I feel like Future Sight is both overestimated and underestimated at the same time. But also, as much as Katakuri may want it to be, it's not perfect. Future Sight isn't the be-all and end-all. A lot of the time, even though Katakuri could see Luffy's attacks coming, the only way he could deal with them was to counter with an attack of his own. There were times when dodging just wasn't an option, and that would be more difficult against Zoro due to the one-up Conqueror's Haki advantage. So Katakuri is more or less forced to always dodge because he cannot afford to take Zoro's hits, which even with Future Sight may not always be possible. And eventually, with enough time, Katakuri's probably gonna get hit. However, stepping away from Haki for a bit, this fight would be something completely different at first because it would be a swords versus trident matchup, but then it would quickly transition into swords versus mochi. On a surface level, Katakuri's powers are a terrible matchup for Zoro because mochi plus Future Sight equals a low gear effect, the bane of swordsmen. Except with Katakuri, it's even worse because it's a low gear effect you cannot counter with Haki because he's not actually cutting anything. Although the disadvantage of that is that if Zoro does hit Katakuri even without Haki, he has no low gear intangibility, and as a result, he's gonna get hurt. Big potential weakness though, swords. Zoro relies on equipment. I mean, yes, he has no sword style attacks, but he can't face a serious opponent completely sword nude, which means that Katakuri has a rather unique win condition. It could become less about fighting Zoro and defeating him at 100% and more about disarming him. But the question is, would Katakuri accept that? I don't think so. I feel like his pride would demand that he overcome Zoro at his best. So that's good news for Zoro, but also I have more bad news. He has another sword weakness, which is that Enma is one hell of a thirsty boy. Against King, Enma was very needy and kept sucking Zoro's haki dry, putting him on a rather severe time limit, and using Enma against Katakuri could result in a similar effect. It's hard to tell because we don't know what the relationship with Enma is post-King. Back then, Enma was testing Zoro, but that might just be the cost of using Enma, and if so, that changes the dynamic completely. Zoro needs to beat Katakuri before Enma drains him, and Katakuri would be the most frustrating possible opponent for those conditions. It's also important to note that Katakuri is an awakened Devil Fruit user, I guess. I say I guess because it's something that I have a tendency to forget because it wasn't all that relevant against Luffy. It was used a handful of times and not to a particularly amazing effect. What it really equates to is Katakuri has more mochi to throw at Zoro, but Zoro is a bad match for Katakuri as well. Like Luffy's rubber, mochi is good at tanking blunt force attacks really well, not slicing. That's why we have diced mochi as a dish. But the conclusion here is that we have way too many variables. Zoro has more powerful attacks, but Katakuri might be impossible to hit with said attacks. What I think it comes down to is whoever has the burden of winning the quickest. If Katakuri needs to win before he gets frustrated or loses concentration, then he probably loses. Whereas if Zoro needs to win before Enma kills him, then he probably loses. And this could go on for a long time. If both combatants manage to keep their cool and keep their lives, then it becomes a matter of who promotes their abilities first. Does Zoro unlock Future Sight, or does Katakuri unlock Advanced Conquerors? Whoever promotes first then has a pretty big advantage over the other one and could secure victory in that moment. But if both promote around the same time, then we're back to even, and it becomes a test of pure durability and willpower, which could really go either way. So I'm relying on you, people on the internet, to provide me with an answer to this mess. And holy crap, I was not expecting this. Zoro absolutely dominated this poll. This is worse than Shanks versus Mihawk. I honestly thought that this would be more even, if not slightly in Katakuri's favor. I guess I'm very out of touch. Although I do find it quite interesting that these results correlate almost exactly with the which character do you like better poll. Always funny how these polls seem to line up. But at least Katakuri did go on to win the who would be a better dinner guest poll by quite a margin as well, assumedly due to his dedication to manners in public. But here's the final verdict on this fight. Here is exactly how it's gonna go down. Zoro probably gets lost on his way to the fight, and Katakuri wins by default. Unfortunate, but almost certainly the case.